welcome everybody to this Industry Insights, formerly known as Code Series. And what I'm going to start off with is, Aundrea, would you be able to introduce yourself a little bit first?
A lot of the work that I do revolves around student engagement and retention. I am the Online Student Experience Manager here at UNT. The UNT Online Student Experience is a brand new program. It's a baby program that we are building from the ground up in the Division of Student Affairs. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the work of what Student Affairs does. But it has been really exciting, but also really challenging to build a new program, even as someone who has worked in the division for over a decade. It is new, it's different, and I think there are a lot of exciting things happening with online students and with EdTech. And so student engagement and retention is something that I am always looking at. What are those things that keep students here? Because it's very important to me that students reach their goals, right? You're investing a lot to come here and be a student. And so it's really important to me that you make it to the finish line to graduation. And so there is a lot of theory and research and practices that go into that, because we know that it doesn't just automatically happen. Obviously, I love EdTech, I love education technology, and honestly, I love it at all levels. Yes, my role specifically is in higher education, but I have 3 little ones at home, so I'm always interested in what's happening with technology in the K through 12 space. I will never forget when I walked into my oldest, she is 12 now, when I walked into her kindergarten classroom. It was very eye-opening to me because there was a smart board, there were like 4 computers, there were tablets, and that looked very different from what I remembered kindergarten being. And I was just floored at the amount of technology that kids were going to be introduced to so early on and things like that. And I think that is one of the coolest things about learning technologies, is that learning technologies have so many different industries that you can work with this in. So whether you're doing K through 12, whether you're doing higher ed, whether you're doing corporate training and development, or even some new things that I've had some exciting conversations with even some of the students in the learning technologies about, kind of this new emerging consumer education, where people are working with different types of learning technologies. And so I think learning is a part of what we do just as humans, and how we can utilize technology to make that happen is really cool.
How do you do?
Go ahead, pop in here.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Aundrea. If let's say somebody were to ask you, describe learning technologies in, let's say, a sentence or 2, how would you describe learning technologies to the individual who has no understanding of what learning technology is all about?
If I had to describe it in a sentence or 2, I would say learning technologies is the theory, the practice, and the tools used to enhance learning through technology. I think that is how I would word. I probably would word it a little bit better if I thought about it a little bit longer, but I think that's really important. I think why I include kind of theory and practice in that definition is sometimes people think learning technologies is just the technology. And I always tell people, you're thinking about it wrong. If you go just to technology changes. That there are companies that are going to pop up, and then there are also companies that are going to fizzle out. And we're going to be on to the next thing. And so I think, especially as professionals in learning technologies, understanding that your processes, your practices, your theory, those are the things that are going to be consistent. They might change a little bit over time as we learn more about this space. But we have to consider those things, honestly, I think, before we even consider the technology pieces. And
so would you then say that learning technologies is something that is a crossbreed between education and also the technology, the pedagogy and technology merged together then?
Absolutely. So you're considering that kind of that learning and cognition. How does our brain work? How do we learn? And those types of things. And you're pairing it with what we're able to do through technology. So technology isn't necessarily a magic fix it all button, but it can definitely help us get to our outcomes a lot faster, and invite us to create experiences that maybe we wouldn't have been able to have in person.
Okay. Then how would you then see your degree, your master's degree in learning technologies helping you in your present job?
In my role, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit later, part of my role is paying attention to what new technology is emerging, right? We've been talking a lot about AI. There are lots of platforms that are designed to create community with college students. Just a lot of different things that are out there, things to make our processes easier. And so some of it is exploring those technologies and see how they can work and exist in our current frameworks and systems that exist at our institution. And some of it is like navigating what is out here. I'm sure you all know as students that we use a lot of platforms at UNT, right? And some of it is like identifying some of the frustrations and the friction, right? All of these systems don't talk to each other. It's probably my biggest pet peeve. When we have systems that don't talk to each other, and how can we reduce some of that friction? How can we make this experience easier for students? How can we make it easier for students to find things that they need in order to engage in their experience, whether it's in the classroom here at UNT, whether they're an online student and it's in their virtual classroom or in their learning management system, and even if it's on the student affairs side of all of their co-curricular experiences, we're all using technology. And I think it can be complex because we have our personal technologies and things that we like to use, the big debate of whether people are like, PC or Mac or, Android or Apple or, whatever. We all have our own preferences. We are all now starting to develop our own personal ways of using technology. If you get in there and you Google like life operating system or personal knowledge management, everyone is coming with their own processes and own platforms that they're using. And we're trying to now figure out how we can work efficiently in this larger system. And sometimes it can kind of become a tangled mess. And so some of my job is kind of straightening out what exists. How can we utilize, APIs? How can we make things talk to things easier? How can we maybe make better decisions about technology that we're using based on the current technology landscape of our campus? And so I think it's that side of it, but also knowing that it's dynamic and it changes, and being ready and able to learn new things. A lot of people that I work with in my division have been working in higher ed and student affairs for a long time. And honestly, student affairs is very different from even 10 years ago when I started my career. And I think a lot of why it's different is because of technology.
Do you then, in your job right now, do you then think that somebody has to be very technical to be able to perform the job? Or do you think with your training in learning technologies was sufficient enough for you to be able to launch into something entirely different?
So for me, and I think we might jump around and I'll kind of go to some of these.
Yes, please, go ahead.
We'll go back to some of these, but we'll talk a little bit about my road to learning technologies, because I think that's some of what we're getting to here. So I made a pretty big career change in 2011. In 2011, I was working as an accountant. If you heard from Astrid earlier that my bachelor's degree is in accounting, and I also had an MBA. And so I was working in managerial accounting, and honestly, I really just got bored. It was really fun the first couple of years because it was my first job out of college. I was working on my MBA while I was working full time. And so it was kind of the excitement of I'm starting my career. And about 2 years in, I think it takes most people about 2 years to kind of feel their groove in a new role. I kind of got into my groove. This is cool. I can do this. And I didn't feel like I was learning anymore. it was very repetitive, and just kind of got boring. And so I remember waking up one day and I just told my husband, I was like, I think I gotta quit my job. And he's like, what are you talking
Wow.
about? And I was like, I'm just bored to death. And I just feel like if I keep going, I'm gonna be just bored out of my mind. And this is no offense, because I know we might have some business and accounting majors here on the call. Great program, great job if that's what you like to do. But for me, I think I've always had a love of education, and I kind of shied away from it because my parents told me I wouldn't make any money as a teacher. And so, kind of when I think about my childhood dream as a little girl, I always dreamed about being a teacher. And so, that's how I got into higher ed student affairs.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, it was hard, especially in the beginning, because I didn't have a background in education, didn't
Mm-hmm.
have a background in higher ed or student affairs. I
Right.
had my experience as a student leader to lean on, and that was about it. And then just some really great mentors who I said, this is kind of what I want to do. I don't know what it's going to look like when it's all fleshed out, but I do know that the last time I felt really happy about the work that I was doing was when I was a student leader. So I'm going to go back to the beginning almost and start here.
Uh-huh.
And people thought it was crazy. And so a lot of programming, a lot of one-on-one students. And then, in about 2014, 2015, that's when I started working in orientation and transition programs, specifically with mentoring programs and upperclassmen initiatives. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the start of my just dipping my toes into learning technologies. Back then, we were using Blackboard instead of Canvas as our
Yeah.
LMS.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Back then, if I think like student population wise, we had about 10,000 seniors enrolled at UNT. And so kind of the way my brain worked was, how do I reach this amount of students? If this is a population that I'm supposed to be reaching, I don't have a budget to do something for 10,000 students. A lot of our students were also working. A lot of our students had other obligations and things like that, so they can't always get to campus. And so that's honestly when I started kind of playing around with Blackboard to see what it could do, and kind of randomly tried things and they worked. And
Mm-hmm.
so from there, I got curious and I said, well, surely there's some way you can learn more about these kinds of things. So I did a little search and I'm like, oh, learning technologies, it's a whole field, a field I didn't know about. And it ended up being just a really good fit for the work I was doing at the time, but also just
Mm-hmm.
a good fit for me personally.
So you did when you joined the what do you call it, learning technologies, you were kind of like not very into techie stuff, and then now that you're in this role, you have developed your technical skills, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've always kind of enjoyed tech, but definitely wasn't into it as much as I was, especially starting the learning technologies program. And it was
Mm-hmm.
definitely from the perspective of just being a gamer.
Okay.
So I like video games. And so that
Right.
was like the extent of my technology use. And so when I started the program, and it was around, I think 2015 when I started the learning technologies program.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One, I was amazed at all these things that were out there in
Right.
ed tech that I didn't know
Right.
about.
Mm-hmm.
And so my question then became, could we take these technologies from a learning space to a co-curricular student engagement space? And I think
Okay.
that's the question that I'm still
Right.
thinking about, still working towards, still trying to
Uh-huh.
find better answers for. And
Right.
so it was definitely what I learned in that program that
Right.
helps me, one, to improve in that role, but then I think brought up a larger conversation in the Division of Student Affairs about
Right.
what are we doing with our technology and what are we doing with our online students.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes higher ed is kind of slow moving.
Right. Yeah.
Education in general is slow moving. Even when you look at K through 12, it takes a lot to kind of change the way that we think about things. But then you have things that accelerate that, right? So
Yeah.
COVID-19 happened.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I am the person, because people know that I had kind of, I graduated from the Learning Technologies program in 2017. I started doing hybrid and online programs in my work. I think I had another promotion in there somewhere. So there were some other programs that fell underneath my area. And I was also doing some training and development for student staff and even professional staff. And so that is when COVID happened, then everyone started asking me, okay, what do we do with our programs? Have you tried this? Have you used this? That type of thing. So I was really grateful for the experience because I think it was easier for me to reimagine some of the things we did in person in an online format, not only from my experience in the program, but because I'd started that work a little bit in my role. And then fast forward to 2022, when I kind of stepped into this new role and asked to kind of create a new program, I was asked to be on the search committee for this position. And I said, wait, what? I want to be on the search committee. No to that. I want to apply because I think that not only do I have the knowledge from the Learning Technologies program, but I also have the experience from working in student affairs for so long. And I think when we see what it's kind of looking like in our field, I think we get a lot of people into learning technologies that have had experience as K through 12 teachers or that have been in student affairs or another place in higher education, or that have worked in HR in training and development. And this is now kind of an additional piece of knowledge and another step in their career that makes sense. But they are definitely drawing on those previous experiences and now thinking about how do we reimagine these things that have been working in our field, but using technology to help us reach our goals and using technology to help us help our participants or our students, depending on who we're working with, reach their learning outcomes. And so in some ways, I think my pathway is unique, but in other ways, I think there's a lot of similarities to my story, especially when we think of the makeup of a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people in the Learning Technologies program.
Yeah, excellent. Now, when you talk about in terms of technologies, two of the main things that always stands out today are things like virtual reality and artificial intelligence. Tell us a little bit about artificial intelligence and how do you use it in your work right now?
I was thrown into AI. So I'm definitely learning a lot. Right now, I currently sit on the university's AI task force. And so it is a collaborative task force with folks from all over campus, a mixture of faculty and staff, various departments and divisions represented, really to help us figure out what should our policies look like on campus. Are there kind of guardrails we should put on the use of AI? How do we experiment with AI? Can we put together even like a budget for what we should be investing in artificial intelligence? And so that is kind of at the largest scale, that is a big part of my work right now. But I think on a smaller scale, what my division is asking of me is how do we help the staff in our division utilize AI to be more efficient in their roles? I think when ChatGPT launched, which I guess October 2022, I think is when when ChatGPT just kind of hit the world and everyone went crazy over AI. I think we've seen like some really sophisticated uses of generative AI, but then we've also seen some really, well, that's probably not the best way to use it. Type my essay, type a 500-word essay on this. And, that's not really a good use of AI. And so I think a lot of the conversations that we're having, not only for staff, but then so we can also teach students, how do you use AI as kind of like a partner for your brain? I think that's kind of how I use it and how I think about AI as a partner for my brain. It's a place where if I have a lot of thoughts floating around and I don't quite know how I need to organize them, I might just say, I'm thinking about this, and then it can help me organize those things, or it can ask me more questions about what it is that I'm thinking, so that I can get to producing better quality work. So I think the big consensus, I think, amongst folks who are looking at AI, that AI is not necessarily a replacement for humans, but it definitely is a tool to help us become better at what we're doing. That being said, I think there's also a lot of hesitation with AI. There's a lot in terms of data security. What data are we putting into these platforms? What can they do with our data? And that is a big concern and a question that has to be addressed before there's kind of just like widespread adoption of these technologies. And also, I think there's like lots of ethical questions about AI. How will students feel if, instead of being able to get a hold of a human, we have them type a question into a chat bot to be able to deliver services? Like, is that going to feel impersonal? Does it make you feel like you're not, you know, a human, and that we don't care about you? Student affairs is really the heart of higher education. This is where we get a chance to check on students. This is where counseling services exist. This is where, you know, mentoring and coaching exists. This is really the heart of higher education. This is really where, I mean, everyone cares for students. So I don't want to say that, you know, student affairs is the only place where people care for students, but those kind of care pieces of your experience as a college student, a lot of them are housed in student affairs. And so there's really an importance of still being human in the way that we do our work. And I think there are questions about, like, how do we reimagine our work? There's lots of conversations happening right now around productivity, how people feel about productivity. And I don't know that the answer is for us to be more efficient with AI just so that we're expected to produce more. I think that's something that at large, with just the sentiment in the US right now, I think that's something people will be very unhappy with. And so then it's, can we use AI to reimagine our work to where maybe we get more face time with students? Can we use AI in our work so that we can be more efficient in one area, but we can be more creative in another area? And so I think that is also one thing that I'm having conversations with directors in my division about is, if you are more efficient with AI, what does your department do now? How does your department change? How can you reimagine the work that your staff are doing? Because I don't think the answer is for us to be able to use AI and then we can finish our jobs in 2 hours. Like, what do we do for the rest of the day? I think we have to have something to fill that with.
Yeah. So while we were talking earlier on, you were looking at the different AI landscape in the past and in present. You know, I love what you were talking about. Could you briefly show us what the landscape was like? Okay, so this was 2014.
This is 2014. So this is Matt Turk. He, with a team of people, kind of puts together, I think every year, maybe every couple of years, this infographic about what the big data, machine learning, and AI landscape looks like. And so even in 2014, you can start to see there's still a lot of things occupying this space, right? There's a lot of things here. I think when people, because everyone kind of found out about AI with ChatGPT, people think that ChatGPT is the only thing out there. And ChatGPT did a really good job of making AI technology really accessible to people to get their hands on it. But they're not the only person in the game, and they probably won't be the only person in the game.
That's true.
As we keep going. And so this is 2014, but if we look at 2023, there's like a lot more things on here. And at different levels. So there are different platforms that utilize AI in different ways. And so you can have your generative text, you've got generative image, we'll have generative video very soon. Some people already have it in their hands. We don't necessarily have it in our hands yet. but that's coming very soon. But also there are some other specialized things that AI is doing, like AI to help you analyze and review data. And so when we think about student assessment, I'm sure you all have probably gotten like lots of surveys or something like that.
Yeah.
From UNT about your experience as a student. You
Yes.
know, some of those surveys
Yeah.
I
Yep.
create, some of those are created by other people.
Uh-huh.
But honestly, when you have like a free response that you can get in there and you can and you're answering it, what we go and what we do is we code that data so that we are able to find themes in your responses. As someone who has been doing this for 10 years, let me tell you, that takes a long time to do by hand. And it's something, honestly, that AI can just do a lot faster than us, and in some ways more consistently, in terms of coming up with themes to help us better utilize the data, because it does us no good if it takes me 6 months to code data from an assessment. That means that's 6 months before I can even start looking at how do we implement the
Yeah.
results of what we're hearing from our students. And so it's things like that. And so I think there are, for those of you, and I know that we probably have a lot of master's students from the Learning Technologies program, although we have undergrads in here too. But there's AI designed specifically for research and for to help you find research that might be relevant to the things that you're working on. Now, me personally, I still sit on the fence on how I feel about some of them, but I think that's why we need processes in place so that
Yeah.
everyone kind of has fair rules in
Yeah.
how do I use this, right? We
Yeah.
want to be able to use the tools that we're given, but we don't want to plagiarize, right? We don't want to
Yeah.
cheat.
Yeah.
But if we don't know what the rules are and we don't collectively come up with what those are going to be,
Yeah.
there are going to be some people who are maybe more hesitant to use some of these tools that might fall behind, and there might be others who maybe are pushing the limits too far to where, you know, can we really say this is still your work?
Yeah.
Like how much assistance did you get from
Mm-hmm.
artificial intelligence?
Yeah.
And I think we have to come up with those together. And I think the other thing to me that is wild in the midst of all of this is that we still have groups of people in our lives, in our communities, who have no idea what's
Yeah.
happening with AI,
Or
who
who are
have
very
not used,
resistant to
who,
AI.
yeah, who are resistant, or honestly just in the busy day-to-day of life,
Correct.
somehow they don't watch the news, or you know,
Yeah.
whatever it is, or maybe they heard it and they just never thought to try it or to use
Yeah.
it. And so I mean, I think when I was originally in the Learning Technologies program, and we talked about digital divides, and we talked about, you know, people being able to have access to technology, but then there's also research that talks about, especially when we're talking about sometimes Gen Z, that
Yeah.
they can do a lot on their phones, but they don't actually, you know, they may not do as much on their computers. And so depending on how we're building platforms and things like that, that can create some of those divides. And so my next question is what type of digital divide are we going to have now when
Oh
it
yeah.
comes to artificial intelligence? And what does that mean for equity? What does that mean to
Mm-hmm.
just for what is fair and what is right? And
Yeah.
honestly, those questions, we don't know the answers to them yet. We're figuring them out, we're exploring, and
Okay.
honestly, we're probably asking more questions.
Yeah, that's good. I like what you say about how you, when you collect all the data from the students' survey and stuff like that, you get a heap load of data, and then you have to figure out how to actually do it, and it
Mhm.
takes a lot of time and stuff like that. And that brings me to the perspective where I remember Buckminster talk about the knowledge doubling curve way back in the 70s, and how he actually projected the graph where how the technology or information was actually doubling on every 10 years. And now when we look into the way how AI has come into place, the knowledge doubling curve right now is becoming more like an explosion. And we
Yeah.
talk about all these different things in the past as well when we were discussing about different issues. So I remember you put up a graph and you showed me
I
a
think I know
graph.
which one you're talking about. So
Yeah,
this
that's
one
right.
is
Yes.
talking about the volume of data created, captured, copied, worldwide. And honestly, I think it's got data going up to, actual data going up to, I believe, 2020 or 2021, and then the rest are predictions. And so I think thinking about this, you know, back in 2020, we weren't really talking about AI.
That's true.
And so I think most of these predictions were kind of just based off what we humans are creating just with the internet and things like that. And so one big question that I think I've been thinking about is, how do these predictions change now that we can obviously create a lot more data? When we talk generative AI is different from a keyword search, in that a keyword search kind of pulls data that's existing and then it points you to the direction of that resource. Generative AI creates new data, new information, new output based on what it's trained on. And so that is like a really big distinction. And so if as humans, we are putting out these crazy amounts of information, and honestly, it's interesting to see how the type of data has changed, where a lot of it is even video now. So when you think about your Instagram Reels, your TikToks, all of that is going into this landscape. And so interesting to think about how these predictions will change with AI, but then also how do we process or evaluate all of this data or information that we come into contact with on a daily basis is something that I think about, because even I feel overwhelmed sometimes. I think even when I think I've got a handle on what I'm reading and what I'm making notes on and what I'm researching and things like that, it is still hard to keep it all straight in your head because it is so much. And so you and I talked about this a few weeks ago, a little bit earlier, where we talked about, you know, this model that talks about how do we get from data to information to knowledge to wisdom. And I think that these are going to be some of the questions that we have to answer, of like, at what point is it too much data? You know what I mean? Like, at what point is it, are we just creating so much that we can't go through it, we can't comprehend it or understand it, and we cannot, you know, synthesize it into things that make sense, information that we can use, knowledge that we can pass on, and things like that. And so I think these are all just really interesting things that I think about. And again, we don't know necessarily what the answers are, but they are definitely things to think about.
Agree. And in this the IKW model, the whole idea was to actually move data, because it's just so abundant everywhere right now, to move data up all the way to information, to generate knowledge, and to actually generate wisdom. And based on that, I want to quote what Dr. Jeff Allen from the Information Science Department says. He says that wisdom is the pinnacle of human cognition performance. And I think it is really, really apt to your topic today, in terms of how you actually use all the information or data available in your early on of the earlier part of the career, using all the data that you get, and then how you actually put it all into some form of information and you piece them together, and then how now you are part of the online learning experience, which is an entirely different game altogether. And the other thing I want to also point out is that this particular graph that you have on the left-hand side, it's actually measured in zettabytes. And that is humongous.
I mean, it's almost like my brain can't even comprehend how much data that is. Like, you think about the whole of the internet and the whole of books and everything. Like, that's just a lot of information. I do think, and I'd have to go back and look at it, I do think it's interesting also when it talks about how much of the data that is counted here and predicted is like duplicates or replicates of data. And even then, when people think about the kind of the copyright issues or the issues that even artists have with generative AI,
that's true.
It's creating something new, but it's basing it off of what exists, what it's been trained on. If it's an AI that has access to the internet based on what's there on the internet. And so it also, how new is what we're generating
Uh-huh.
through AI. And and then if we get into kind of all of the copyright and who owns
Yeah.
what and that type of thing, that's something that could have us here for days as well.
Yep.
Because that's, I think
Yeah.
we
So I think
haven't
going
figured
back
out
to,
what that is.
yeah, I think going back to the DIKW model, it is more manageable for us to actually manage wisdom right now rather than managing data, because data is just way too abundant. So I think that we are running out of time for right now. I think what I'll do then is I'll pass it back to Astrid, to our moderator, to moderate this the next section of this talk.
Thank you, Eugene. I mean, what an amazing conversation. We can go hours and hours talking about this.
Astrid, can I go back to a couple of slides just early on? I want to make sure, especially because we were talking about just quick things of like how you make this transition to working with ed tech.
For sure, yes.
Things that I think are really important are to be able to articulate your design process and your method. And so I know, at least when I was in the Learning Technologies program, we used ADDIE a lot, and ADDIE is great. There are also other methods out there. I still use and rely on ADDIE, but I think whatever method it is that you're using, making sure that in an interview you can talk about it and give examples of how you used it is really important. You always got to be learning, so stay up to date with what's happening in the field. Connect with your peers and colleagues. They're going to be the people that help you out when you get into your professions. If you're able to attend conferences and join online communities, I think that's great. And then practice and experiment. Technology, I think, is one of those things that, for me at least, I learned better just by doing it. And so I think those are some important things to kind of talk about. So I wanted to highlight those there.
So yes, so I'm gonna jump right into the questions we have in the chat, and let's start with this one. How can educators and students be prepared to navigate the ethical considerations and privacy concerns associated with the use of AI in education? That question is from Manar. Thank you for your question.
What I'm advising folks in my area is, like, unless you have explicit permission from our IT department that this data is okay to put into this AI, I would not do it. Any personal identifiable things that could identify you, things that could identify your students, or things that could even identify the school or institution that you work at. That being said, depending on where you work, you might have platforms where your data is protected. So if you get into Copilot right now, at least when I see Copilot, I see that there's UNT system. I see that it says my personal and institution data is protected because we have an enterprise account with them. But I think for all of these, until we have policies, I would lean more towards the side of caution. And I would say that if it's not something that you would freely give this information out to just anyone on the street, if you wouldn't post it on your blog, then we probably shouldn't be putting it into any artificial intelligence, at least not yet. They're not perfect. There's still issues happening with artificial intelligence. And I would say, if you don't understand how your data is going to be used and protected, you should not put your data into any platform.
Yes. And there's another one that was from Lisa on behalf of a student, I believe so. And this is, do you think AI takes the human bias out while coding, or it can't, or it depends? What do you think?
Not at all. And I think there's lots of articles coming out and research that people are currently doing about the bias that exists in AI. And it isn't just AI, it's all technology. Our technologies still exist in the frameworks that our society exists in. And so if you think about bias being on the internet, bias being in a lot of bias being in training data that we're using for AI and things like that. I don't know if any of you all know Jason Simon. Jason Simon works here at UNT in our Office of Data Analytics and Institutional Research. He's been here a long time. And one thing, even early on in my career that I haven't forgotten that he always says, he says, garbage in, garbage out. And he's talking specifically about assessment, meaning that your research is only going to be as good as the data that you are collecting to be a part of this research. And I think, unfortunately, technology is going to show us both the beauty and the ugliness of humanity. I think we see that with the internet, we see that with social media, and we're going to see it with AI. At least in my opinion. And I'm not an AI expert, so I'll preference that. But yeah, I think there are definitely bias, and that's a concern in using artificial intelligence.
Great. We have a question for Rahul, if I'm saying that correctly. It says, how will the future of learning technologies evolve in the next decade, and what opportunities of challenges lie ahead for the industry, in your view?
Y'all are coming with the big guns. These are really hard questions. I think that we're going to see a lot of rapid changes right now. I think we're already seeing them, and some of them are good and some of them are bad. Although this is really exciting, I also think that there are lots of concerns and hesitancy with AI. And so I think how this is politicized and what kind of laws and policies are created around this will help to shape it. And so I think it's hard to say right now. And that's why I say I think the best thing you can do as a professional is to stay current, to keep reading, even give yourself news alerts for things that are coming out around educational technologies that you are working with. I think the overall consensus, and I just got back from a conference over spring break. I went to a student affairs conference. And there were lots of sessions on AI there that I was excited to sit in on and learn from. I think the general consensus is that similarly, just like the internet, there are going to be jobs that go away because of AI, but there are also going to be new jobs that are created. I think most people think in general that we're going to get to a point to where everyone kind of has like an AI companion. And so if you are on like a premium version of ChatGPT, you know that you can already create custom GPTs to kind of help you do whatever it is that you want it to do. You can train it to do certain things and to give output in a certain way or format. I think what most people are thinking is that we're going to kind of live in a world where just how when I was growing up, I did not have a cell phone until I was probably a junior in high school. And it wasn't necessarily something that was always attached. But now it's like, if we go anywhere without our phones, we're like, what is this? I think it's going to be kind of ingrained in our everyday experiences, just like our cell phones are, of that we use our AI assistants. I think Microsoft actually was really great in naming theirs Copilot or renaming theirs Copilot, just because that's how people are describing what they imagine our use of AI to be, is that they will be our personal co-pilots, our personal assistants. So I think that's kind of what I could give there. I hope that's a little bit of what you're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that was the answer that they were looking for. But I mean, there are so many answers and so uncertainty of what is happening in the future because everything is changing so rapidly. But thank you for sharing your view in this. And we have a couple more questions, and this is very similar and the one we just talked about. This is from Mayusha. How do you see the role of data scientists evolving in the field of learning technology over the next few years? And that kind of aligns for what we just talked from previous question.
Well, I think one thing that concerns me is when I think about all of the different AIs that are there to help with research, that's really cool and really exciting. But it also, when I think about people going through their PhD programs and really like falling in love with their research topic and really like just spending time with that research and going through it and going back to articles and things like that, I have concerns with when we have AI that can summarize an article for you, when you have AI that you can put in the articles that you want it to use, and it will start writing, you know, a thesis, a report, an essay for you, and it'll be complete with citations and everything else. I think what I think about and sometimes worry about is what is real and what is not. And are we going to be able in a few years to be able to tell what is real, what is not, whether that's in data and research, or whether that's just even thinking about me. I'm here on Zoom, but there's AI where I could put pictures of my face and do a little snippet recording of myself, and it will generate a video of my likeness. And then if you hook it up to like a text generator and it's listening and you know, replying and responding, a large language model is responding with a likeness of my face, who would be able to know the difference on Zoom? And so I think it really comes down to what is real, what is not, what isn't real. And I think we're going to have as just a society, better ways. And I think this is interesting because this is what a lot of faculty at UNT are talking about. Okay, how do we teach students to verify sources? What is a reliable source? And even in an age where, you know, we're going to be to a point where we may not even be able to trust a video as evidence of something that exists and things like that. And so I think it's kind of this question of what is real and what is not. And I know that gets to kind of the creepy, scary, dark side of AI, and I don't necessarily want to go there, but I think that is a question that I have moving forward: is how are we going to be able to tell what's real? And honestly, will it matter? Are there instances where it doesn't matter if it's real or not? And maybe that's a better question. Instead of are we going to be able to tell if it's real or not, where does it matter that we are real, and then where does it not matter? And wow, what does real even mean? There was a slide and I didn't get to share it, and it talks about what I'm reading. And right now I am reading Life 3.0. Okay. By Max Tegmark, I think is how you pronounce his last name. And I don't want to give too much away because some of it is exciting to read as you read it, because it's like, it's a story, or some of it is. But he talks about the different versions of life and how do we define life. And I know usually we talk about things that need water and things that breathe, but what if that's not life? He talks about life as in it's hardware and it's software. And so life 1.0 kind of being our cells, and that they are programmed to do a certain thing, they are built a certain way. And then humans, we're kind of life 2.0, maybe 2.1, thinking about that, and that we have kind of our hardware when we are born, but we don't have to necessarily evolve our software. We can upgrade our software through learning. And so defining life 2.0 as your hardware is something that evolves. So what humans kind of look like is something that will evolve over time, but our software is something that we can design. And I think this concept is so interesting. And so then when he gets to life 3.0, he talks about, you know, being able to design both your hardware and your software. So that would be like an AI robot that theoretically could design, like add a different piece to itself and design its hardware, but also upgrade its software through design. And I think that is fascinating, because I don't think I have ever, before reading this book, thought about life that way. And thought about life as like not being what we typically think of when we think of living creatures. I feel like I went off on a tangent that I don't know how I got there. I apologize.
No, thanks you for the great recommendation. There is something that Lisa put in the chat. If you have a chance, I'll mention it in a moment. But we have one more question before we close today, and that's from Bansri Shah. The question is, if you were a student again, what would you do differently?
If I were a student again, what I would do differently is I would connect more to the peers in my program. I would have loved to have been a part of like a student organization for learning technology students. And I know that we have one now, which is really exciting. So it's the Learning Technology Student Association. I believe Eugene is the president. of the student org. And so you should definitely find them in OrgSync and join and things like that. But most people who have a background in student affairs, they come from a cohort program with their graduate program. My program was not necessarily a cohort. And so when I see like all of these great, great relationships that they've built over time, and they have people at other institutions that they can call and like kind of brainstorm with or share things with, I think you can kind of create that same kind of bond and connection through a student org. And so get to know your peers, because they are gonna, when we face challenges in the field, and it's a thing, it's new. And so there's no textbook answer. There's nowhere where we've learned this before that we can rely on. We rely on each other. We rely on our colleagues. And you all in the Learning Technologies program now, these are your peers, and they'll be your colleagues when you all are working. And so making sure that you establish those relationships so that you can rely on them to solve all of these big, crazy problems or even opportunities that we're trying to figure out.
So I just wanted to come back on and thank Astrid, Eugene, and Aundrea for a very exciting conversation. I could have sat here another hour listening. Hope to see you all again at the next event. Have a great afternoon. Bye, everybody.